On today's episode of the Regression to the Mean podcast, we are ranking the top 20 quarterbacks in fantasy football for the 2024 season, and we are breaking them into tiers that will allow you to dominate your buddies in fantasy football this season. I'm your host, Shaun Moran, and I am joined by my co-hosts, good friends, and fellow knowers of ball, Aidan Holler and Keegan Thompson. Boys, today's a special day. We are officially starting our draft prep for the 2024 season. Keegan, you had an epiphany last night about the long journey ahead, and I think it spooked you a bit.
I just wasn't ready. It's been
how you feeling?
It's been fun, just casually thinking about best ball and like la-di-da-di-da. It's like, oh my God, I have a redraft draft in like 2 weeks. We have a draft trip in 3 weeks. Like the season is here. It's kind of snuck up on me.
It really has. And I have not told my fiance about the draft trip. I kind of forgot about that until this moment. So thank you for that. Keegan, that'll be a fun conversation.
Okay.
Aidan, you ready to talk ball, man? How you doing?
I am ready to talk ball. Yeah, we're getting into the meat and potatoes of the real draft prep. So I'm ready to go. QBs is always a nice place to start. There's not as many guys. Things are a bit easier to sift through. So I'm ready to rock.
The format for today's episode is pretty simple. I've ranked the top 20 quarterbacks for the 2024 season. I've broken them into tiers, and Keegan and Aidan are going to give me feedback on if I have a guy too low, too high, or in the wrong tier. Boys, you ready?
Let's do it, man.
Let's do it.
All right. We've gone visual here with the tier makers. I've never felt like we're a boomer. I did not know you could do this online. So
I didn't know you could either. This
is pretty cool. Okay, so the first tier is pretty simple. I have it labeled as the undisputed studs. I've got Josh Allen. I've got Lamar Jackson. I've got Jalen Hurts. And I got Patrick Mahomes. The guy that I want to highlight here is actually Patrick Mahomes. So his ADP right now is 2. I have him at 4. Nothing against Mahomes. I actually think he could have a massive season. He has improved offensive weapons. I think he's due for a little positive rushing TD regression. I think the Chiefs defense isn't going to be as good as it was last year with the departure of L'Jarius Sneed. And I think Mahomes could have a big TD season, but kind of hard to bank on that. Sometimes we see what happens when the bottom falls out. Mahomes had a stinker last year because he didn't throw a lot of touchdowns. So he doesn't have that rushing production that, say, Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson has, and you feel that. So that's why I've got him 4th in my tier, but I think he could easily be QB1 if he throws a bunch of touchdowns. What are you guys thinking about the undisputed studs?
Yeah, I have my own tiers as well listed out, Shaun. I basically just put Konami code quarterbacks like that we know hit every year. And I only had Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson here. But in my tier 2, I have Patrick Mahomes in parentheses saying can be moved up because we're not too far removed from him like lighting up the league via passing touchdowns and passing yards. And I think this is going to be the best weapon group he's had in many years. And I know Andy Reid, Nagy, Mahomes, like everybody's admitted that it was a down year and it was actually a frustrating year for how they played football. Like Mahomes is very vocal that that's not the football he would like to play. I know it's not the football Andy Reid would like to play. So I think as long as they get back to that and they start airing it out, they now have 2 extremely speedy wide receivers. Rashee Rice might not get suspended, and they have a hibernating bear and Travis Kelce that they'll just use at the end of the season. I feel like Mahomes could easily be in the top tier conversation here.
I actually went the other direction. So I actually moved Jalen Hurts down to 4 into tier 2. And I've got Mahomes rounding out tier 3 as just Josh Allen, Lamar, and Mahomes. Strictly just around like the idea that I think these guys are going to regress in opposite directions. Seems like Mahomes left a ton on the bone last year, and I think he's going to regress quite positively in the touchdown department. So I really like him as a top 3 guy. Then Jalen Hurts, it's really the rushing for me. I don't see another 10-plus touchdown season on the ground. They brought in Saquon Barkley for a reason. I think the usage is going to change a lot. Him getting hurt down the stretch pretty much just decimated their kind of, late season and, very short playoff run. So I think Jalen Hurts kind of takes not a backseat, but I do think the rushing comes down quite a bit. I've really got no issues with the passing. Yeah, it's hard to really complain about the guys we're looking at here in the top 4.
I think even with Jalen, like I'm looking at the points per game just simply off last year, weeks 1 through 17. It's like Jalen, Lamar, Josh are the only ones who were 21 points per game and above. And, Pat Thorman still has the Eagles offensive line that's going to be a top 3 unit. I think with the replacement of Jason Kelsey, the word is like they're still running the tush push. Like that is very much still in play. All people inside the Eagles org are saying they're going to run the tush push. Like kind of for me, it's like until I don't see it, I'm just going to keep him up there. Like,
yeah. I'm betting against Saquon Barkley this season, which means I can't bet against Hurts as well.
Yeah. In our last episode, Shaun made a pretty obvious stance against Saquon.
Yeah, so like if I'm anti-Saquon, I can't be. Yes, I can't be anti-Hurts at all. And I do think they run at a much faster pace with Kellen Moore this season. So maybe some rushing production gets canceled out with more passing attempts. Like that could help. And then I know we didn't cover it, but Lamar, I think, could have a huge season. I think their defense could regress, and I think he could throw the ball a ton more. So that's something to watch out for with Lamar. Moving on to the next tier of guys here. I have this tier labeled as just rushing superstars. Like these guys could easily finish in the top 2, top 3 if things break right for them. And at QB5, I have Anthony Richardson, and at QB6, I have Kyler Murray. So that's my tier. I have A-Rich and Kyler in the same tier. We're going to do like our QB flag plants later on this week. Surprise, I don't have A-Rich as one of my guys because I feel like everyone in the fantasy industry is going to flag plant A-Rich. So I don't want to be redundant here, and I want to give you guys better options. But man, he has an elite offensive coordinator. He has a great O-line. He has a good young supporting cast, and he has a role tailor-made by the fantasy gods. So if A-Rich is healthy, would not be shocked if this guy is the first quarterback off the board next year. But there is some risk baked in with A-Rich because the injury, he's just not accurate. We haven't really seen him develop as a passer yet, where Kyler's a star, man. Kyler's a freaking star. Like where people are sleeping on Kyler Murray, he's the quarterback 8 right now. He should not be like CJ Stroud and Joe Burrow should not be going ahead of Kyler Murray. I'm sorry. Come on. This is fantasy football, not real life.
I think the only thing missing for me here, Shaun, is one, I already talked about this. Like Mahomes is probably in this tier for me, but I said, could be moved up. He has similar points per game production. He also doesn't have the same rushing upside as he used to. He can still get busy on the scrambles, but I actually am pretty high again on Dak this year. He's somebody I actually have in this tier. Just even going off points per game last year, like Dak is 5th in the league and quarterbacks in points per game, eclipsing that like elusive 20 points per game mark with 20 and a half. Offense remains the same. Weapons remain the same, minus Tony Pollard. But like, is Tony Pollard really reason that Dak was hitting last year? Not exactly. Like, I think the offense is still going to be really potent. They're going to have a top 2, top 1 fantasy wide receiver, at least based off draft picks, again, tied to Dak. I'm like, it's hard for me to think he doesn't belong in this tier when I just saw him put up 20 points a game in this last season. So I'm curious to hear what you guys' thoughts are on Dak. But like Kyler and Anthony Richardson, I have both in this tier. Anthony Richardson's like the only one who belongs in that top tier just based off fantasy points per dropback. Sample size is small. We all know it, but everybody talks about it. He averaged almost a full point per dropback in fantasy, which is absolutely bonkers.
Absurd.
Like 3/4 of a point per dropback. That's insane.
He's a god. He's a fantasy
need
god.
him to stay healthy.
Yeah.
Need him to stay healthy. But this tier makes a ton of sense. Like Kyler and A-Rich have like pretty identical upside, in terms of the overall skill profile. That's why I moved Jalen Hurts down to here. Like these are all like very potential like QB1s. Whereas like the top 3 are like my my favorites for QB1. Whereas like these 3 guys, because of their skill sets, I would be surprised if any of those 3 finishes them. So no, this is a great tier. Yeah, I don't get the Kyler ADP personally. We'll get into him more in one of our later episodes, but no, I really like that tier.
Yeah, Kyler averaged close to 19 fantasy points per game.
Yeah,
coming off the torn ACL. Didn't really run that much unless it was in the red zone. His supporting cast is great, and his defense sucks. Like, this is just going to be shootout Kyler Murray. It's like everything we want.
Like supporting cast just got better too.
Yeah, way better. Way better. Greg Dortch is now in the 3 wide receiver sets, so adjust the ranks accordingly. That's a very big deal.
Speaking Shaun's language.
Diminutive slot receiver for the Cardinals. Get ready to speak not making the playoffs, buddy, for me in best ball. In terms of Dak, like, he's in my next tier pretty easily. Dak's been really efficient for fantasy over the past 2-3 seasons. It's just kind of vibes. The Cowboys' vibes are weird. They just feel like a team that could implode a little bit. Now, I could be overreacting, but it's just, I don't know. It's the vibes kind of feel off with the Cowboys, but we'll touch on that a little bit more in the next tier. And the next tier guys that I have here, I have labeled as efficient pocket passers with a little bit of wiggle. Right. That's this tier
here.
Like
that.
And it's pretty big. Honestly, this is where I think a lot of these guys
go slow here. I got to
pretty comfortably,
all of these,
but
so go slow while I add them in
the
tier.
I got 6 guys in these tiers because at the end of the day, like I could see any of these guys absolutely crushing in fantasy and just putting up really similar stats. But I've got CJ Stroud here to start off this tier.
Okay, gosh, it was hard to find.
I've got
some
Jordan
random heads
Love
in here.
Yeah, I see Andy Dalton, and it's freaking me out. Bears QB1, Andy Dalton. So I've got CJ Stroud. I got Jordan Love. I got Joe Burrow in this tier.
Okay.
I've got Brock Purdy.
Okay.
BCB.
Yep.
Where's BCB? Oh, there he is. I was going to
Don't worry, I found distraught.
I've got Dak Prescott.
Okay. I'm going to put him at the front here. I can.
And then I've got Justin Herbert in this tier as well.
Okay. Gosh, I almost clicked Trevor.
Oh no. He's coming later. I guess in this tier, like all these guys are super similar in my opinion. They all have some rushing upside. They can get busy on scrambles. They can score some rushing touchdowns. They're all in good offenses for the most part, like offensive coordinators that I trust that can scheme up efficient, fantasy-friendly offenses.
One of them has a head coach that we can really trust, and that's Herbert. I won't say his offensive environment's the best, but I do trust Harbaugh.
Man, Greg Roman's had some quarterbacks do really well over the years, whether it be Tyrod Taylor, Alex Smith, Colin Kaepernick, Lamar Jackson. Hey, he's had his fullback run way too many choice routes, but
they do get busy.
His quarterbacks get busy. Yeah. His quarterbacks get busy in the red zone, man. So I honestly, we'll talk a little bit more about Herbert. But I'd say, like, again, Herbert's probably the one that I have the highest against ADP. He's currently going 16th. I have him at 12th. I'm just expecting a big bounce back for him. His offensive environment sucked last year. It's not like his weapons are great, but I just think he's going to have a really good offensive line, and he's just way too talented of a player to bet against. Like, this is the cheapest you're going to get Justin Herbert in his career outside of his rookie year. So I feel good about him. But again, like looking at all these guys, like Brock Purdy is one of the most efficient players in fantasy. He finished 3rd in fantasy points per drop back last year behind Josh Allen and Anthony Richardson.
0.63. That's it. Yeah, just behind those two. It's actually pretty insane. He's almost on the verge of 20 points a game in fantasy.
Yep. Jordan Love was top 8. Super up and down season, but I mean, he gets busy, as Keegan would say. I mean, Stroud's the one, right? Stroud's the one I've got -2 against ADP. That's going to, ruffle some feathers a little bit because CJ Stroud, the talent is immense. The supporting cast is great, but he doesn't really run the ball. So he's got to throw like 40 touchdowns for him to really cash at that ADP, right? So I don't know. Do you have anything in this tier? This is a big tier. Should I break it up? Any thoughts on it, Aidan?
I have some thoughts, but I'll let Aidan go first here.
Yeah, I've got 2 guys actually. Like, I actually think this tier makes a ton of sense. Once you get into that 5 to 12 range, which is roughly what we're looking at, I think you're looking at guys that have very similar ceilings, very similar floors. Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert, it's very similar player profiles. But 2 guys here that I would personally bump up that we've got a bit lower is Jared Goff and Tua Tagovailoa. I think both of those guys were both top 10 QBs last year. Jared Goff plays outside 3 times this year in 17 games. The dude's just going to absolutely
amazing call out. I feel like people aren't paying attention to that.
Like, he's going to walk into another 4,500 yards. Awesome scheme there. And then Tua, man, he just secured the contract, led the league in passing last year. So it kind of bumps down these guys in our next tier without spoiling it yet. But I think Goff and Tua absolutely belong with these guys. It's very similar for me. Probably at the end of this tier, we're at 12, put him at 13, 14, and you're probably still getting a bargain potentially.
This is by far my biggest tier with the most players in it. And of course, like I have Dak pushed up 1 tier, but I also have Stroud, Love, Burrow, Purdy, and Herbert in here, Tua and Goff as well. But I've also included the top 2 rookie quarterbacks in this tier in Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams. I believe they also belong in this tier. And we'll talk about it maybe on a flag plants and fades episodes. There might be some quarterbacks I'll highlight, but this is by far my widest tier because I think it has very similar outcomes, but there's also 2 players in Jayden and Caleb, I believe, that like could do some very interesting things this year and put them in very similar points per games as a lot of these guys. Because let's be honest, these are all like very good pocket passers. Like that's what my tier is called. Very good pocket passers and electric rookies. Everybody has very similar points per games. Like Herbert's 18.6, Jordan Love's 19.6, Purdy's 19.3, CJ Stroud 18.9, like Tua, Goff, like they're both up there in similar points per game, all very similar points per dropbacks. And I have the 2 unknown rookies as well.
The reason why I separate Tua and Goff is because I just don't think there's any rushing production from those two. So again, they might have similar like range of outcomes, but I just feel like the ceiling with this group is a little bit higher. Even though Tua and Goff play in really elite offenses, but I feel like this tier here. I mean, I just feel like there's more rushing upside at the end of the day. They just got a little more with
Fair.
it. That's it.
That's kind of why I've included Caleb and Jayden into this, because even if they struggle as rookies, they can hit home with some rushing. But I'm like booing off what Aidan said. Like, I believe Jared and Tua will both have like fantastic offensive output seasons. And like, look, if you're going to throw for 30 plus touchdowns and 4,500 yards, you will put up fantasy points and probably be right next to these guys. So it's hard because I have 8 guys in one tier. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I couldn't leave any of them out.
Well, I appreciate that, right? Sometimes you got to make some tough choices. I made some tough choices for the next tier, but the next tier is I just called the mystery box. That's what it is. I've got Caleb Williams, I've got Jayden Daniels, and this is hilarious because he's going into year 4, but I've also got Trevor Lawrence. I've got Trevor Lawrence in my mystery box tier here. Look, like I clown on Trevor a lot, even though I really like him as a player. But like in our group chats, I'm always sending in like I can't believe Calvin Ridley dropped that. It's like Trevor Lawrence just throwing an egregious INT or just fumbling at the least inopportune time. My notes that I have on Trevor is like, is Trevor ever going to put it together? Like, he's got good skill guys. The O-line should be healthy. They easily could be a shootout team. I don't think their defense is that good. Like, he has rushing upside. He's athletic. He was super injured last year. The play calling sucked last year. Do we just give him a mulligan? Because he was elite for like those 6 or 7 weeks at the back end of his sophomore year. He had that huge comeback against the Chargers. He went toe-to-toe with Mahomes and Arrowhead. Like, the guy's obviously a talented player. And I feel like there's like a 20, 21 point upside like in his future, like when he puts it all together. So I don't really want to fade Trevor Lawrence too hard, but at the same time, I don't want to put him in the same tier of guys that have gone out and just done it, in my opinion, and just looked more confident. But at the end of the day, is Trevor Lawrence really all that different than Jordan Love? Not really, right? Like, so I mean, I think one player probably plays in a better offense than Jordan Love. But like Trevor Lawrence has had that, 18, 19 point per game fantasy season that Love had. So I don't want to be too harsh on Trevor, but it's hilarious that he's still a mystery box at this point in his career. I just think he has a really high ceiling. Same with these other 2 rookies. So that's why I included him. But I'm going to pass it over to our resident Bears expert in Aidan Haller. How do we approach Caleb? Like, is Caleb like somebody who's so good you could just draft him? That's it. And like, you're just rolling with Caleb. Like, do we think he's going to be that transcendent as a rookie?
The infrastructure is just so good. Like it does kind of feel that way. Like
maybe the best a rookie's ever had.
Like everything you hear in camp so far is like, like the kid gets it. Like you're seeing the highlights. He's doing it all. Like I won't get into Caleb too much because I know we're going to talk about him more. My tier here, I just bumped Trevor down to D, and I just called it the 2 rookies. Trevor, I don't know. It's like, will he ever put it together? It's like, we shouldn't still be saying that. It's like the decision making continues to be just outrageous. I think he is what he is. At his best, he could easily be in that B tier. He's got the rushing upside. Like we see him run. He's got the legs. He's got an arm to make any throw on the field. But it just feels like Trevor continues to get in Trevor's way. So I'm pretty fine with just putting Trevor down to tier D. If I get burned by Trevor, like what? Like, do you think Trevor has top 10 QB upside? Like, not really. Maybe.
I think so. I think so. Yeah.
I'm okay.
I don't know if I'm looking.
Like,
if I'm looking at these quarterbacks, like the top 6 we have, and I look at Love, Burrow, Purdy, Herbert, Stroud, Dak, these 2 rookies, like I don't really like want to pick Trevor over any of these guys.
Like I think
at least right now,
like Caleb or Jayden, if things hit right, like potential top 5 QB upside versus Trevor. I'm just like, if I get burned and he finishes QB9, I'm like, that's fine. Like, I don't think I missed out on a whole lot there. So I kind of just kept this one as the rookie tiers. I think Jayden obviously has the rushing upside. He could rush for 1,000 yards this year. Just go Justin Fields-esque and pass for another 2,500, 3K. And they may not need to win a ton of games, but he could be absolutely electric for fantasy. So, yeah, I've just got the 2 rookies in here personally.
I get it. I think I'm not ready to give up on Trevor yet. I play around with the RotoViz like range of outcomes tool, and it's like his ceiling outcomes 26 fantasy points per game based off comps. So it's like you have to accept he has a really high ceiling. So that's why he's there for me. I think if you put him with someone in the same tier as like Burrow, that just feels kind of egregious. Like, come on, Joe Burrow's had like major fantasy production in his career, but like Burrow's sketch to draft this year, guys. I don't know how good I'm going to feel drafting Joe Burrow in redraft. It's one thing in best ball. Drafting him in redraft. I had him in redraft last year, and Jordan Love saved me, but Burrow was miserable last year. Miserable.
The wrist and the calf. It's the injuries have been annoying, to say the least.
So the next tier of guys is just efficient pocket passers with no wiggle. So these are just guys that I don't think are going to run, but are good. This next tier that I've got here is Jared Goff, Aidan's favorite non-Bears player. I think Aidan loves Jared Goff.
Jared Goff.
He loves Jared Goff. Kirk Cousins is next.
Gosh,
there he is.
Kirk's face
purple
even
guy.
in
He's
here?
next to Danny. He's next to Danny.
Oh
Dimes.
my gosh!
Oh, they still got him in purple.
I've got Tua Tagovailoa.
Man, that name really beats your ass, huh?
Can't do it. I've got Matt Stafford. Secure the bag,
Carson
Matt
Wentz
Stafford
down the bottom right.
Dude,
that
there's
is.
some funny faces in here. Marcus Mariota's here.
And then last but not least, I have the drug addict himself, Aaron Rodgers. He makes the
I think
top
Tyson
20.
Bagent's even down here. That's Bagent right there, I think.
So this tier is pretty simple. Like, is there really a marginal difference between Jared Goff and Tua? No, there really isn't, in my opinion. Kirk Cousins was he was elite last year on like a point per game.
Kirk Cousins was almost averaging 20
amazing.
points per game. Like he's sixth in fantasy points per game last year.
He was ridiculous last year in fantasy. Again, different environment, but good weapons. I think the O-line's fine. We think the play calling is going to be good. And their defense isn't going to be good. They play indoors. Like, this is going to be a shootout team. So, like, I think
it's
Cousins
funny. Like, he downgraded.
Like,
Cousins downgraded at, like, elite onesie wide receiver, but Drake London's still a very good talent. I'm not saying Pitts and Hawkinson are comparable. Well, let's call it a wash. And, like, he massively upgraded at the running back position with a very talented pass-catching running back as well, too. Like, Cousins could very easily replicate the start to his last year at quarterback, and he might be one of the safest bets, like as a late round draft pick. If you are going to miss out on the elite guys or miss out on a Konami code guy, Kirk Cousins is just going to be waiting for slinging the rock.
He's the perfect guy to pair with Jayden Daniels, because like if you're going to take one of these mystery box guys, I think you have to take a tier D guy, and then even if you take Anthony Richardson, in my opinion, you have to have just really,
at least for the first couple
balls
weeks,
of steel. You have to have balls of steel. Yeah, you got to have balls of steel to hold on to A-Rich solo dolo. I feel like you need to pair him with somebody like Goff or Kirk Cousins just to have some insurance, honestly. I'm going to get to Tua a little bit later. I'm not as high on Tua as you guys are, but I get it. Like, he plays an elite offense. His weapons are great. I think they actually run the ball a little bit more this year than people think. So I skew a little bit more towards Achane. So like I'm trying to at least, like, if I'm so high on Achane and low on Saquon, it has to make sense for the quarterbacks, in my opinion.
Yep.
And then the last two old guys, I got Stafford and I got Rodgers. Those are going to be good offenses. I think they'll be slower. They might run the ball a ton, but I think they'll be efficient. And so I think they'll be good bye-week fill-ins. I think they could have pockets where they throw a ton of touchdowns and they'll be super profitable if you're able to start them because of injuries. So I like those guys. Like, the one guy that I struggled with was Watson. I think Watson could have easily made it into the mystery box tier if he wasn't, a sexual deviant.
Did I miss that?
I don't. No, I don't have Watson.
Okay.
I can't. I just struggle with ranking the sexual deviant.
Am I missing a tier here, by the way, Mr.
No,
Host?
no, this is it. This is the 20. So like Watson is easily somebody I think could be in the D or even C tier based off of his rushing upside and his weaponry. Man, he's got good ancillary pieces in Amari Cooper, David Njoku. I think Jerome Ford's an excellent receiving back. So like he's somebody that didn't feel right leaving off, but I really don't want to root for him in any way. So I really try to avoid rooting for him. And again, this is fantasy. You're trying to win. I get it, but that's it. These are my tiers. What do you guys think about tier D? I know you have some thoughts on bringing Goff and Tua up. Do you have any other guys you think I'm missing that should be in this tier?
Yeah, it's interesting, Shaun, because like I highlighted my tier 3, which is tier B here, and it has like a couple people. Like I put Jared Goff and Tua in there. I also have Jayden and Caleb. My tier 4, where you have the rookies and Trevor, is Trevor, Stafford, Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, and actually Geno Smith. I teeter on Geno Smith because I think their offensive line is going to be terrible, and he might not have enough time in the pocket to hit home. And then I have a very bottom tier of like Will Levis, Deshaun Watson, Baker Mayfield, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones, Bryce Young. Like, we're kind of in line on some of these. I just think the way we look at the tiers are different, and maybe I've packed some people into it. But I'd say the only biggest difference is I think Caleb and Jayden are up with the tier 3 big boys. That's kind of my big thing from here.
Yeah, I think the way I approach it is like these are the 20 guys I'd feel comfortable starting, like in fantasy football. Now,
which is a good way to look at it.
If Watson's arm looks better and he looks like he's not football,
I won't draft him.
Yeah, if he's not football Ben Simmons and he like actually wants to go out there and play, like I think you could get some pretty good usable weeks out of Deshaun Watson. And Will Levis could be somebody too that's just printing in fantasy football, but like
league starter.
Yeah, let's see him in a preseason game before I bump him up into the top 20, in my opinion, because Rodgers is kind of hanging on there for dear life, but he is Aaron Rodgers. So, I feel like you got to probably have him in your top 20.
I like it though. These are definitely 20 quarterbacks that I would feel comfortable rostering. I think maybe the only one, I don't know. I'm pretty high on Geno again. I think the wide receiver core is great. I think the University of Washington game plan being pushed over to Seattle is going to be very electric if it works. I have him as my very last quarterback in the top 4 tiers, at least of mine, because if he can't have time to throw the ball, none of it's going to matter. Their offensive line is a massive question mark. But
it's a question mark for sure.
I think we're in alignment for these top 20 guys for the most part.
Yeah, I put Geno and Baker in that tier D also.
Okay, that's fair.
Baker's QB 10. I know Canales is leaving, but I think if we're talking like old guys who get the job done, and at least 2, like they're gonna play all year, barring injury. Like everyone below
that's
this
a good
is
point.
Like, it's kind of like bargain bin. I don't know if you're gonna play 17 games because like you might get benched. Like there's like
I will
like
say
Bo
this,
Nix
guys.
is, Daniel Jones. I don't know if you guys are playing 17 games.
If he stays healthy, the biggest bargain of fantasy football this year might just be Daniel Jones.
It could be.
Depends how much he runs. Because the ACL production is an issue. I
care if Malik Neighbors houses 15 touchdowns this year off wide receiver screens?
Yeah, I feel like the biggest bargain is like, so how big of a deal is this Russell Wilson calf issue? Because if Russ has the Joe Burrow calf and he pops it, and like all of a sudden they're just rolling with Fields, it's not going to be pretty. But my man's going to score 19, 20 fantasy points per game, like easy money in that Arthur Smith offense, like. That's a complete.
We should probably remind people that Justin Fields was like the number 8 quarterback in fantasy points per game last year. Like number 8
at all.
It wasn't pretty.
Wasn't pretty, but remember, this isn't real life.
I miss.
Yeah, so like that's it. These are my top 20. I think you could split some hairs towards the back end, but I think if I were really going to approach drafts, I'd really just want Richardson or Kyler. And then if you're in tier B here, like kind of just the last guy that goes off the board, if it's Purdy or Herbert, like you're going to be in a pretty good spot because I don't think there's a marginal difference between those 6, in my opinion. And you could just stack on running backs and receivers who have a bigger difference than some of their counterparts. So that's probably how I'm approaching draft season this year. And then Caleb and Jayden are interesting, but we're going to get into that on our Flag Plants episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Guys, thanks for joining. Again, if you've made it this far into the episode, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button. Like this video. Share it with your friends. Come on. We don't have to be a secret. Share it with your friends. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Until next time.